Hi everyone, welcome to Animator's Breakfast. This is a podcast where we talk to different people who work in the animation industry. And today, finally, someone has picked what I've always wanted to talk about. So I'm delighted to be sitting here today. This is an incredible treat for me. And I have the incomparable Kirsten Shiel. How are you?
I'm good, yeah.
For people who don't know Kirsten, okay, which you should, she's currently an art director at Brown Bag Films in Dublin here. What show are you working on at the moment? Are you allowed to say? Or
Yes, it's announced now, so I am finally allowed to talk about it. I'm art directing on a show called E014, which is for Apple TV Plus, and it will be coming out at some point next year. We don't actually have a release date yet.
Yeah.
But it's being co-produced with Scholastic.
Fantastic, yeah.
Who are based on a series of books called Hell Diaries that was by Rebecca Elliott.
Yeah.
So it's really exciting to kind of adapt an illustrative medium into 3D animation. It was challenging, but an awful lot of fun.
Wow.
And I have an illustration background, so I'm always delighted when I get to work on something so extremely stylized.
Yeah.
I think Brown Bag like casting me that way too. So I found my little niche and I'm very happy in it.
You've illustrated quite a bit in your time. I always love your Twitter or Instagram feeds because it's just a joy to experience those moments that you illustrate.
Thank you very much.
I know you've illustrated for our proud aircraft friends in Aer Lingus, but also I heard John West Tuna.
Yeah, so that was one of the more bizarre jobs I've ever had. So when I was I lived in Manchester in the UK for about 7 years, and when I graduated college there, one of my lecturers, Emma Knowles. We were friends, genuinely. we're still friends.
Yeah.
She wasn't just taking pity on me, but I think after I graduated, she was still a practicing illustrator and kind of started passing me on a few jobs here and there.
Okay.
And she said, "Oh, I've got this one for John West Tuna. Are you interested? It's in Manchester, like it's an in-person job." And she didn't really tell me much more about it. And I was like, "Yeah, that's okay." Like I was, 21, and I was like, "I'll take anything you'll give me. I just need to pay my rent." And I went in, and do you know those like I instantly thought of The Simpsons when they're doing the focus group research for the Itchy and Scratchy movie.
Yeah.
And there's that two-way mirror thing, and then they're asking everybody all these questions. So it was that. I was doing that, but about tuna. And basically there was a focus group in one room, and then there was all of the like John Weston like marketing product designery people in the other room. And what I had to do was draw the ideas that the focus group was having about the packaging so that the executives could see what they were talking about, because I assume it's because these people don't have the visualization kind of skills to actually see what these people are talking about. But the problem is that I don't eat fish. I've never eaten fish. So I kind of don't really know what tuna looks like. I was kind of guessing. So the design, ultimately, what they wanted to do was have a little window in the packaging so that you could actually see, rather than the tin or the can where you can't see anything. They wanted like a plastic window. So I drew a little thing, and I drew like this half moon window at the bottom of the tin, and then finished up that day. And then I have no idea how many years later, it might have been like 6 years later, I was in the supermarket and I saw my design on the shelf. They hadn't changed anything about it. They still had that half moon window. They used the color that I had very quickly used just to put some color on it. But I was amazed that they didn't change anything about it. So I can put on my repertoire that I'm also a packaging designer for tuna.
And for one of the biggest tuna brands out there.
Yeah, but a bizarre job. Fun, but absolutely bizarre.
So you only went in for a day?
Yeah. It was only one evening or something, and it was in some... It took me ages to find as well. It was in the gay village in Manchester, and I was like walking up and down the back streets, and people were looking at me like, "What are you doing? Like, where are you going? What is happening?" And I was like, "I don't know."
I just want to draw tuna, please. You know, people think that the world of art and animation is this glamorous, like the Disney documentaries make it out to be. Everyone's kind of happy, everything's perfectly planned, you know, but it's really just a total shipwreck most of the time.
Well, I just think it's like, if you think about a studio, especially like going back to animation, it's like if you put in all the schools in all the world, you take all the weirdos, you put them in one place and let them be themselves, and nobody's bullied. So they're allowed to flourish and possibly get weirder.
Yeah, right. Let's get to the, no pun intended, meat of this, this choice. Tell us, I'm so excited about this. Tell us what you chose.
When you asked what my most influential film of my entire life was, no, absolutely no question, no hesitation, it's The Prince of Egypt.
Yeah.
It's just, I love every single thing about this film. I can't wait to talk about it. I was telling you before that I'm so glad that you asked me to talk about it, because I talk about it unprompted so much that I'm glad that somebody actually wants to hear what I have to say about it, because I have so much. Yeah, it's yeah, we'll get into it, I suppose. I don't want to just launch into it.
We're into it now. Launch, you know, press the button.
So I was very lucky that when you asked me about the podcast and kind of were telling me about it, I was actually in work that day in the studio, and who was sitting across the road from me but Aidan McAteer, who was the first episode of this podcast, I think.
He was, yeah. The Iron Giant, yeah, good old Aidan.
I did my research into the podcast and I saw Aidan's name and I went, oh, Aidan. And I started asking him about it. He said, oh, I actually have the Art of book.
Good old Aidan.
I'll bring it in for you.
Good old Aidan, yeah.
So he brought it in for me and gave it to me. And I swear to God, this book was made for people who work in animation, I think. Like the kind of background and the information that it gives you is not for laymen. Like I don't think that they would fully grasp what the information means. It's a lot about like the technology and the decisions made and how to make these things. So it was a great... the absolute perfect book for this. So thank you so much, Aidan.
Yeah, thank you, Aidan. Seriously, thank you. I tried to have a look and find it because you did mention to me that he gave it to you, and I got lost in the art of these things, because one thing I remember when I was doing my master's, I was so excited. I was writing a thesis on Pixar films. This is 2011 and 12, so they hadn't kind of hit their slump yet. They were still going hard. I remember finding looking through the art of books, and I thought, what a great resource into a filmmaker's mind. And I brought it into my thesis supervisor, and I was like, look at this is great. And he was like, oh yeah, they're great coffee book tables. And I had the air instantly deflated out of me. I was just like, oh yeah, I totally understand what you mean. It doesn't have that coffee book table, you know, just leave it out there and anyone can kind of enjoy it.
Yeah, like I think that the quality of art of books differ hugely. Some of them are just almost like finished stills from the film and nothing else. Yeah. And what you really want to see, the initial sketches, because that's the exciting part. You don't want to see like just finished turnarounds and finished stills from the film and all that kind of thing. But I guess it's different audiences that they're aiming at too.
Yeah. And you know, The Prince of Egypt is, I'm going to be very specific about what I mean here, is probably one of the greatest animated films ever made. You know,
it
truly.
Is I'm not going to be shy about it. Yeah. When I started going out with my boyfriend, he's a massive film buff into like live action film, like proper films. But when I think it must have been our second date. He was driving me home after, and he asked me what my favorite film was, and I said The Prince of Egypt, and he kind of laughed and said, "No, not like a proper film." And I've never let him forget that. And I think it's massively underrated. Like, I think it's such a pity that, you know, you talk to some people who've never seen it. And to me, that's, I can't imagine having never seen it. Like, it was so forming in my taste in art.
When did you first see it?
So I was given it as a gift in, I think it was 1998. Yeah. I remember, like a lot of artsy kids, I was weirdly obsessed with Egypt. That seems to be one of the things that artsy kids, they're drawn to it. So I had heard about this film. I would have been 6 or 7 at the time.
Ah, okay.
And I was just really excited about this film because I thought it was going to be about, you know, ancient Egypt, and of course, but like I remember being surprised at the biblical aspect. I had no idea that that's what was coming. I just heard, Prince of Egypt, and I was like, oh, that's an Egyptian film.
Moses, what's going on?
I was like, oh no, because I went to Catholic school. My mom loves Jesus, so it was quite forefrontal in my life, and I was like, oh Jesus, here we go again. No, but I love it now. It's it's all good. I also remember it being stylistically the first film that I was like really noticed that it was very, very different to anything else I'd ever seen before in terms of like the character design, especially. I guess that like
big time.
I didn't especially grow up with a lot of Disney films. My mum liked to go to the bargain box for videos. It was a lot of like, I didn't see The Lion King until I was a teenager. So I grew up on like Hunchback of Notre Dame, this movie, and then like, but a lot of like these kind of like not even Disney films, like there was a lot of knockoff films.
Yeah.
So I saw an awful lot of dodgy animation growing up, but Prince of Egypt is the first one that I remember being like, this looks so different to anything else I've ever seen before. And I love it. Yeah. And I was reading in the Art of book that I was reading, Carter Goodrich, and I think it's Carlos Grangel. I'm probably absolutely butchering that pronunciation.
That's okay.
But they were the two guys who were kind of initially doing the character concepts at the beginning. And they had this was like the first film studio that had kind of wanted to break away from all the Disney traditions that had kind of become the norm for many animation studios. They were like, we want to do something completely that's not Disney.
Yeah.
And what they did was, so Disney character designs at the time were kind of divided up into thirds, at the top of the head, third for eye, third for nose, third for mouth, evenly distributed across the face. And just to make it their own, they just made the center portion of the face, so the nose, bigger, and made the other two smaller. And they just, that balance, that little upset of balance created like in a completely different look that we'd never seen before. And then that carried forward to be like the Dreamworks style for a while. So like it carried into like Road to El Dorado. Yeah,
big time. Joseph, King of Dreams. Yeah. All their traditionally animated stuff.
Also kind of looks a little bit like hieroglyphics. That was also partially an influence.
Interesting. Wow. I guess the Egyptians definitely do. Like Ramesses and everything totally could be a hieroglyphic. Yeah. But you're totally right about the noses. I mean, especially Aaron's nose, massive. Yeah. But it's so well balanced. And
they turn so beautifully, like the form of those characters, even though they're so stylized, they just have such solid form. It's so beautiful.
Really, they do turn really well. And the film really challenged that because there's a lot of camera movement rotating around these characters, and they played so much with 3D environments that allowed the camera to move. But then to animate the characters being turned around in that environment, massively difficult, especially like to hold that detail. And there's incredible, really some of the best delicate acting I've ever seen in animation on human characters, in a traditional medium.
Yes, definitely. I think that there's an awful lot of like, it's not like we kind of see in a lot of films where it's like, cut in a conversation where you're looking between whoever is talking.
Big time. Yeah.
There's a lot of held cameras on characters reacting.
Yeah.
And this really subtle animation where they're listening, but like emotions are playing across their face. And I'm especially thinking of that bit where Ramesses, he realizes that Moses has not come back to...
and he has the ring.
Yeah, and he has the ring and he brings it up to his face and like there's so much pain in his face and he closes his eyes and then when he opens them again, oh my God.
You just say like his heart is hardened at that stage. He's hardened.
And like just the acting in the film in terms of like the actual animated characters is just absolutely masterful. Like I think the subtleties and the emotions, like even at the beginning of the film with Seti, the dad pharaoh. When he's kind of talking about, having to massacre all of these babies as like a necessary thing that he had to do, but like there's like a haunted look in his face, and it's so hard to do. Like although they are quite detailed, they're not like dot eyes and a blind mouth, but like it's very, very difficult to do that with 2 lines around an eye to convey that much emotion.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, there's a great example, when Moses was returning, and it has that kind of overlay of him on the camel with his wife, and they're kind of riding in, and you see all the slaves basically working. But there's this one great moment where it like holds an old man who looks up, and he's got this listless, empty, broken look. He looks so tired. And, and I was really studying his eye, just like how they achieve that. And I was like, wow, this is incredible, because it's just a black circle. There's no light pinning into it. There's no like white dot or anything like that. I'm like, how did they get that listless look in his face, this broken man? Incredible.
And that a whole team of animators, that there's different teams of animators usually for every single character, especially for Moses, because he's in nearly every single scene in the entire film. So it's not just like one lead animator for him. There was a lot of different people, and for all of them to meet that standard throughout the film is
incredibly hard. Really something else, totally. Also as well, while we're on the acting, when he first, after the burning bush scene, which is a beautiful scene in itself, but when he leaves the cave and the sheep runs off, and you can see him processing what he's just gone through. That moment where he's putting everything together, and you can see the weight starting to rest on his shoulders as to, his life will never be the same. They captured that moment so beautifully. It's like a moment where your life is never going to be the same again. And then he's looking down the valley toward everyone. And I just was totally blown away. Again, there's no talking. It's just how it's framed and what the incredible animators have done to pull that emotion out.
And speaking of like around that point when he's talking to God and talking to the burning bush, like God is not an animatable character. So we are not talking about animating God's face. We are only looking at Moses' reactions.
Yes.
He's just listening.
Whoa, great pull. Great point there. Jesus, yeah.
It's so like how to animate that and keep it interesting and keep it visually exciting while he's just reacting and taking all this news. It's incredible. Speaking of though, there's such heavy themes in this story. Yeah. Like this is not, I think it's why I still enjoy it so much as an adult. Like I watched it again last week and I've seen it. I couldn't even tell you how many times I've seen this film, but like I was still gripped throughout. There is no boring parts. There is no nothing. And it's so heartbreaking still. Like this is a biblical story that's not just Christian. It's known through all Abrahamic religions. It's actually probably originally a Jewish story.
Oh, totally. It's the Old Testament. Yeah.
But, to deal with these really heavy like genocide and killing babies and like slavery, everything, and to handle it so well that me as a 6 or 7 year old, I can't remember how old I was, like just was so gripped by it and that I still enjoyed it. I was saying to my brother the other day, I don't know if he wanted me to mention on the podcast, but when we were kids and we watched this film, the plague of the livestock, when all the cows are dying in the field, he always cried at that bit. He was like, I just don't understand why the cows have to die as well. They didn't do anything.
That is powerful. I always get goosebumps watching and listening to the plagues part, and the way they planned that, because they what have you got going on there? You've got the God coming down and destroying Egyptian power, basically. He's attacking all the gods' powers, all the major gods, through all these different plagues. So you have to achieve that. And that's powerful to witness. But they use the same iconography they've established throughout the film. Like, when the fire's raining down and you see Ramesses and Seti's giant statues there, being pelted by these fireballs, but also you've got how it's affecting the Egyptians. And on top of that, you have the core of the story, which is these two brothers who are in direct conflict. And that's ultimately what the song becomes about, where the chorus of God in the background is like, this is happening. When they sing, I sent my sword. This incredibly powerful being in the reality of this story sent his sword in to kill these people, but at the same time, you know, how that affects these two brothers who are totally in conflict, losing loved ones, supernatural powers, waging war in your society, but they keep it so tight and so smart to just never stray away from the weight of their decisions, you know, and how it affects them. And I think really the strength of the film rests in there.
Yeah. I'm not any sort of a writer or director. I'm actually quite clueless when it comes to stories, but I do recognize when one is good or bad. Like in industry, I can definitely recognize when a script is going to be better, and like an animation,
scripts are hard to judge. Yeah, scripts are hard to judge.
An animation, you can make it look as impressive or as beautiful or as complicated as you want, but if the script is bad, it will never live up to, you know, any sort of scrutiny. Like it's like buying a house. It's location, but with animation or with film in general, it's all about story. And I think that this has such a strong story. Like the decision to make it about the brothers. So I was saying to you earlier that you're going to laugh at the research that I did for this. A couple of days ago, I read the book of Exodus.
Whoa!
Yeah, because I
tell me more.
I just wanted to know what source material we were working with and what they adjusted and what they changed and the decisions that they made to make this such a gripping story. So in the Bible, it is very much like, you know, Moses was taken into it was actually the Pharaoh's daughter who became his adoptive mother, but he was still kind of like, it seemed like he still kind of knew about his heritage throughout his life.
Yeah.
So the decision to hide that from him and have like that moment when he finds out, and it's very tumultuous, I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
And then he goes into the desert, and when he comes back, in the Bible, he's like 80. And he comes back and...
No wonder he died in the desert. Yeah.
Pharaoh doesn't really seem to know him when he comes back. Like they have absolutely no familiarity. They have no sort of... There's no indication of recognition or any sort of personal relationship there.
Yeah.
So to make them brother figures, I thought was such a good decision, because like that's what brings you into this. And this is a story about brothers.
Yeah.
Even though it's this big Bible epic, it brings us right down to like an extremely human level. And like I find that so like in the Bible, he kind of pushes back on a few of God's decisions, and he is kind of arguing with him a little bit.
Yeah.
And then in the film, you can kind of pick up on that a little bit. Like, you know, after he goes in to Ramesses, after all the firstborns have been killed and Ramesses' own son is dead, and he says, okay, you can go. When Moses leaves and he has that little breakdown on his stairs. Own, oh my God, that breaks my heart every single time. But it's just so human that like he knows he has to do this, but he doesn't feel remorseless about it.
Yes, great word. I think that's what I mean by like, if this story was true and these events happened, right? How would that make the people who are experiencing it actually feel? Yeah. And they really never stray away from that at all. You know, it's very easy in animation to cut a scene like that. Oh, we don't need to see that actually. It'll save this much money. Yeah. But in showing how intense an experience that is, you know, he still wants to care for his brother. He reaches out and touches his shoulder. You know, he does everything he can to plead with him, saying that worst is to come. And he still goes ahead and does it, but he knows the horror of what he's just done. You know, he understands that. And then you are going to disagree with me here, the only small criticism I have of this film.
I won't accept it.
This is totally for me, is how then they just patch it into the miracle song. You know, this moment of horror, you know, previous horror, and it's so sad and weighty. And then his sister, what's her name, Miriam, she comes up and is just like, miracles happen, and starts, and everyone sings about it and they leave. And I understand you need to have that great moment of we're free. You know, they don't understand the horror of what he's going through. And I understand, you know, that's why it's a small criticism, because they don't understand what he's just been through. His wife does. Yeah. You know, Miriam's a believer, but I always found that bit, found it a bit disconnected in the sense of, wow, that was so weighty. but now I'm supposed to
Now
cheer
we're
for these
cool.
people.
Yeah. I think it's I read it in this book today. And this book, by the way, if anybody's interested in it, is called The Prince of Egypt, A New Vision in Animation.
Fantastic.
And it's kind of about all of the background to create it. Very interesting.
Yeah.
So I was reading in it today that they actually were having an exact conversation about how to bridge this.
Wow.
And they were in Egypt at the time doing their research trip. And it said that two of the lads were on the back of the Jeep bouncing around, and they said it should be a song to kind of deal with the very intense emotions. Because it would be very difficult, I guess, to write dialogue. To kind of deal with that.
Yes. Yeah.
And then have like kind of secondary characters. So it's not, that song is not concentrating on our main cast. It is concentrating on secondary characters who are kind of, it's more about the people now and not about our main cast. But yeah, I take your point.
Yeah, thank you. No, but that's also a great point to say. It's like, you're totally right. The focus of the film shifts again to the actual true core of what they're trying to achieve. You know, now that they've achieved it, of course, it should be a joyous moment. And look, the kids are loving it. Hear the kids singing and dancing and having a great time leaving Egypt. And that's fantastic. You know, it is lovely to see that. And I get what you mean, because Moses plays no part in that song. He's just walking around with everyone. And Ramesses is not there at all. Also, it's interesting because, you know, in the Bible, they don't name the Pharaoh. He's not Ramesses.
No, it's just Ramses.
Yeah.
You read it too, did you?
He's just a Pharaoh, isn't he?
Yeah. I think he is just Pharaoh,
Yeah, he's just Pharaoh. And I think it was in this film, or maybe was it maybe it was the Ten Commandments, they named him Ramesses. Anyways, sorry, that's a nonsense point. I was just curious.
No, I think it's so that like it's placing it in a specific period of history, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. That's the purpose of it. I was just curious of the origin. Yeah, it makes it far more realistic then. I think as well, one of the true strengths of this film is this is something I've been struggling with in terms of animation. As much as I love it, you don't really see many animated epic films. You know, it just doesn't really exist. There's less than 5 that I can think of. One is The Prince of Egypt, total epic. Another one is Princess Mononoke, an epic film in all its proportions. Beyond that, there's a few I might say, oh yeah, that's pretty epic, like The Lion King. But in terms of that, it's like, what constitutes an epic? And one of the biggest things for me is scale. And the scale of everything in this film is insane. You know, the framing of when Seti is talking about it only takes one weak link to break a chain, and you see his massive statue behind them weighing down on Ramesses, and you see that motif carried throughout the film, which is so powerful. Yeah, you know, people don't use that scale.
The production designer mentioned this as well, that he purposefully wanted, so when they actually went to Egypt and kind of saw the ruins and saw all the monuments that they were going to portray, they weren't as big as they portray them in the film, but they wanted to make them feel that big as they would have done to those people, you know, that they're kind of they're not as big as skyscrapers, but to those people they would have felt like skyscrapers. So he adopted this method where he put the disappearing point way back, way back, so that everything seemed 10 times as big as it actually is. And I find that method very interesting. Like, I used to be a background artist, so I know that like making that kind of tricky perspective, it would have been so planned to a T, what the kind of perspective tricks that you would have had to put into and all the thought that would have gone into it. Crazy. Such a good idea.
Yeah, a great idea. And again, it's totally serves the story, totally serves what it needs to do. And again, I've not seen that ever in other animated films in terms of how they frame all that stuff. Some of the framing is just unbelievably powerful. You know, the moment where Moses and Ramesses are arguing and his kid is there. And then, you know, you see the wall with a mural of Seti killing all the Hebrew babies. And you've got Moses on one side, Ramesses in the other one, and the kid there with the torch directly below where all the babies are dropped. I'm just like, that's so visually powerful.
Yeah, all the lighting in this film. You're going to remember forever. So it's used so beautifully. Like in terms of like cinematography, if this was a live action film, I think that it would be really hailed as like using light to tell a story is so powerful because it's animated. It gets a little sidelined, even though it is the same thing.
Yeah.
Such is the life of someone who works in animation, you know.
keep flying that flag. But even, you know, when Ramses is carrying his son's body to the table.
Yeah.
And you've got that pillar of light streaming down.
Yeah, they used Gustave Doré as a huge inspiration for this film because of that, because of his storytelling with like really dramatic lighting.
Yes,
and that was really strong right from the beginning. So this was DreamWorks' very first animated film, and it was a company formed by, oh my God, I'm going to forget everybody. I'm terrible with names and I forget them all the time. So these are very famous. It's Steven Spielberg,
Jeffrey Katzenberg,
and the music guy, David Geffen. So there you have film, animation, and music all come together. Yeah. And it was their idea to have the 10 Commandments as their first film. And they decided that they wanted the 3 main influences to be Gustave Doré, Claude Monet, and David Lean. Yeah. So like they already had a very, very strong visual language right from the very beginning.
Incredibly strong.
How they wanted it to look. And like that inspiration carried throughout the whole film, like this very painterly, really big scale, really good storytelling through light and framing and perfect. It worked.
You're so right, actually. Yeah, now that I think about it, was like Doré's use of light is outstanding, and Monet's use of color.
And that really loose painterly effect that they got in the backgrounds, which works so beautifully.
Yeah. And even still, David Lean, who's a huge inspiration on me, you know, obviously Lawrence of Arabia or The Bridge on the River Kwai, just the scale, you know, he made the biggest epics ever. The scale of his films, and especially Lawrence of Arabia, not being afraid to let a shot run its course, which is like we were talking about earlier. They just let these emotions play out on screen. It's not cutting between conversations. The cuts feel necessary. Yeah. Which is rare.
And like, I think that the research trips that they made also made a huge difference. Like some of the kind of preliminary work that they did and the sketches that they did when they were there really like made it directly into the film. Like they went to Egypt and then they also went to Sinai.
Oh yeah,
where it's kind of the deserts and the mountains and everything that they have in the middle part when Moses is living with the nomads. And that influenced everything. It influenced the music. It influenced all the storytelling that they have as well.
And again, music written by our old pal, Hans Zimmer, who did an outstanding job.
I love the music in this film. I think it's so beautiful. I think the songs they hold up so well. It's just, and it's so, it even not even like the full on musical numbers, but like even the music that's kind of in between in scenes, like it's so powerful.
The actual score, it is very, very powerful and you know, not cliche really. It certainly has, you know, it knows its roots, but it never felt out of place at all. It never felt like, oh, they've done the desert noise, you know, that kind of thing. It feels so incredibly beautiful, and even I know you said not the musical numbers, but they're phenomenal. Like Deliver Us, the opening. Oh,
don't get me wrong, I absolutely adore all the music in this.
It reminds me of, I think Deliver Us is on par with The Circle of Life in terms of, you know, incredible film openings with song, and I feel like they're basically the same effort and effect in terms of, you know, this big opening number that totally tells the story of what you need to know going into this, and then it just like finishes on this incredible point and cuts to black, you know, and you're just like, okay, I see what you've done here, and I love it.
And it's amazing to me just how many dark themes are being dealt with with such, like, it's giving them the weight that they need. The horrors of slavery, and like even when they're going in and killing all the firstborns, it's not hiding any of the violence. It's not like they just go into the house and there's a scream. Like they are grabbing women by the hair and dragging them, and like it's horrible. It's horrible to see, but like you need to deal with that story with that weight. You can't be kind of hiding behind, oh, it wasn't so bad. It was bad.
It was very bad. Yeah, because you see the like whip marks across slaves' backs. There's a great moment in Deliver Us where the old man is reaching his hand up and another slave picks him up, and you're just like, oh, and then a slaver pushes them both over again. And pushes them out of the way, out of frame. And I'm just like, wow, the raw brutality of that.
Oh no, and like as a kid, those curved knives really scared me.
Oh yeah.
There's something so terrifying about them, isn't there?
Yeah, I love it so much. It's a soundtrack I play in the background all the time.
Same. I didn't want to admit that.
Yeah, totally, all the time. I mean, it's so powerful and inspiring. Again, my two favorite songs, apart from the score, Deliver Us and The Plagues, I find them so beautiful. And again, when I rewatched the film, I never really appreciated Look Through Heaven's Eyes. I think that's what it's called.
Yes.
And when we met and I was talking to you, and I was like, that's where I had paused it. So I went home and pressed play, and I was blown away by the song. I was like, how did I not appreciate this before? You know, this is incredible songwriting. I guess I never understood the theme of that song. And it's the same for possibly why people might shy away from this film, because they're telling a religious story.
It's kind of, whenever you watch any of the YouTube, anything on this, people in the comments will be like, I'm an atheist and I love this film. And it's like, you don't have to
you don't need to
believe in God. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's not an overtly religious story. It's a very powerful story that is handled extremely well, no matter what you believe in or who you are.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter, religion or otherwise. And it's very beautiful regardless. I think it has a very good message anyway.
And they do preface it saying, you know, we understand this is a religious film. We just tried our best to capture the essence of what we thought is a good story. And we tried to do that with respect. And I feel like they totally achieved that, really and truly.
I think so too. I imagine that if it was made today, I'm not sure it would have been handled the same way.
Interesting. Yeah.
I don't know if it would have been made at all. I don't know if they would have kind of gone near it. Because like after reading Exodus, like they do take an awful lot of liberties with it.
Yeah.
And I think that, I don't want to get too far into this.
No, it might have caused a bit of an uproar, you know, if they're not handling the material exactly as it's written.
Yeah.
I totally understand that. And that happens, you know, it probably did happen with the release of this film. I'm not sure how people reacted in those kind of circles to its release. I just know it didn't do as well as it deserved to be, you know.
One very interesting tidbit that I read about though in regards to that was they spent months trying to decide how to do God's voice in the burning bush scene, and the bit where he's like, take your staff, Moses, that bit,
remove your shoes.
So they were trying for ages to decide how to do it, and at first they were thinking about a gender ambiguous voice, and they kind of decided against that. They thought that might cause issues, and then they were trying to decide maybe it would be multiple voices, like people that Moses cares about, they would all kind of come together, and then they thought that maybe that would get into polytheism, which was the point, is that it's not polytheism. And ultimately, so Val Kilmer voices Moses. They decided that Val Kilmer would also be God, so that the idea is that everyone hears God in their own voice. So it's like your inner voice speaking back to you. And I thought that was a really good decision. I was like, that's so smart.
And so respectful as well of the religion, because it's like, in terms of, you know, growing up a child in a not necessarily a super Catholic household, but, you know, my grandparents were, and, you know, having to go through all the hoops and getting baptized and, you know, all that kind of stuff.
All the hoops.
Yeah, all the hoops. All three of them, the big three. I found it so interesting that they respected the religion to the utmost degree.
Yes.
You know, in terms of how you approach something like that. You know, it's funny, we always hear about the decision that solved the problem, but how hard is that problem to solve? I find so interesting when it comes to filmmaking. Like, sure, that light bulb went off, but what was it like before that?
Yeah, and like all the iterations they went through, and all the I just think about all the meetings they had.
In the back of a truck in Egypt, yeah. What do you think God's voice should be?
And then like once you decide the voice, it's like the visual representation as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Of, the burning bush is, I think it's beautiful the way they did it. It's like smoke, it's like water, it's glowing, it's not fire, like straight fire, which I think wouldn't have been quite so elegant. And then also, like, I know that it's not exactly God, it's the angel of death, the part where that comes down and kills all the firstborns, but it's the same visual effect to kind of link the two. And I think it was just done, that mist, it was done in like a very beautiful, light-handed way. Like, I think it would have been very difficult to decide how exactly to do that. Like, is it an actual angel that comes down and it's quite scary?
Yeah.
Like those biblically accurate angels maybe would have taken us all out.
13 eyeballs pop out of a tree. But they used CG for that, didn't they?
Yes, and that's one thing I wanted to talk about is just how well the CG has aged. I couldn't get over how beautiful it still looks. I was like, as someone who works in CG, it's so hard to get it to do that. And like that this was 1998 and like that it took 4 years to make this film. So does that mean they started in 94? Like it's insane how well it still holds up. It would have been incredibly difficult to achieve that today, to marry 2D and 3D together so seamlessly, especially for such a painterly style in the backgrounds.
Yeah.
Like, I know that if I was on that team and they said we're doing the 10 Commandments, and I would have instantly first thought of that feckin' wall of water, and I could be like, how the fuck are we going to do? Like, I would have had an absolute heart attack. How are we going to do that? Yeah. And I was reading about it, and it took them 2 years to do it because they were just like, how are we going to do this? But it is nearly all CG, and then they put 2D traditionally animated effects over the top of it, especially the edges of the water, to hide the CG-ness of it and kind of bring it back into their 2D realm. But like, there's some parts where you can really see that it's 3D. Like the boats in the river, I'm kind of thinking of.
Yeah, or his basket.
You can definitely see the CG there. But like with the water, I think that in parts it's hard to tell that it's 3D.
Or, the crowds I found, because I know a lot of the crowds are 3D people, but how they position them and where they put them, it's very hard to tell. Like, I mean, you need a really good eye to go, oh yeah, I can see the CG there, but as a passive viewer, first, second, however many times, I never noticed it until I was kind of researching the film, and I was like, oh God. And now I can't not see it because I'm looking out for it. But before then, I never thought about it. There are elements of CG I totally see, like, the sand wall coming down, and the chariots themselves. Yeah. But I didn't know the whole environment, all of it was around that was CG as well, because they developed specific tools to do this. Like, I think one was called the exposure tool camera to blend 3D and 2D elements. And that must really speed up layout processing then,
Oh, I'd say so. Like, I think that they said for the crowds, especially, they said that there was shots where there was, I think they said 60,000 people in it. Maybe it was more, actually. Sorry, I have the book here in my lap, so I'm going to very quickly flick it open.
Let's hear the real statistics.
They were saying that they had 2 male characters, 2 female characters, and then they had like 7 costume variations and 7 color variations. So they were able to make huge crowds with that. And I was like, that's insane. That's
great.
Absolutely crazy.
Because I know in the Incredibles, like, you can see it. They spent so much on everything else that for the background characters, they were like, oh, we can't spend so much time and money developing these. So they just used one model. And stretched them and deformed them to make it into multiple different characters. And you can see it because all the police officers look like the same man, just some are shorter, But in this, I can't see it.
It's some feat. Like, reading about the people that they brought in to work on this film, like, it sounds like even the people who were just starting out in animation, like, they've become absolute giants in animation at this point. So it seems like the absolute dream team. Like the guy that they got in to do the effects for this film, I did not take his name down, unfortunately. And I have, of course, immediately forgotten it. But he had just won an Oscar for his visual effects work on Twister. And then he was brought into this as like his first animated film. And he was like, It really surprised me to learn that animation is very different to to live action, because you're not just making it look like real, you're making it look like stylized.
Yeah.
Which to us obviously sounds quite ridiculous, but for him, like that would have been quite a shock.
Maybe not today. You're trying to make it look. It depends on the movie, but a lot of it is realistic now. But totally then.
I found the page I was looking for. It wasn't 60,000; it was 600,000.
What? Really?
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
That's crazy, isn't it?
I'm trying to think of which one it is, but there are enormous numbers of people.
It might be that last one, when he's coming down from the mountain and he's looking over everybody.
He's brought the 10 Commandments down. Yeah, that's the one I'm thinking of. Or in the song when they're leaving.
Yeah, and you see it kind of pans across everybody.
Yeah, huge amount of people in those shots. Huge amount. 600,000.
Can you imagine being in a production and hearing that? It's just the absolute heart attack you would have.
We're looking at about 100. Oh, okay.
In work now, if we hear 11 people in one scene, we're like, oh Jesus, how are we going to do this?
Exactly. And make sure the first 40 people in the foreground are traditionally animated. Please. It's like, how many in the foreground? Yeah, about 40 or 50. Oh God. I remember for, The Wind Rises, Miyazaki's last film, before his next one, there was a scene during you've seen it, have you?
I haven't.
Okay. There's a great earthquake basically in Japan. This is to Japan. And there's an earthquake that happens. And there's this incredible scene of all the people bustling and moving through the city. There's one or two shots in there where, Miyazaki is very specific that he doesn't want crowds to just look like crowds, faceless groups moving as a mass. He's like, they're people, so we need to animate them like people would move as individuals. So some of those shots took forever to animate. There's so many people in there, but you feel that world ignite in something like that. Mm-hmm. Whereas in this film, you've got this great thing of they all have the same purpose. They're leaving. So of course you can get 600,000 people walking in the same kind of direction, totally works. Yeah. And it feels stylized in that sense of every frame of this film nearly feels like it could be a biblical painting.
Yes. I'm glad you think so too. And, speaking of the backgrounds, like, I think I consider it kind of my area of interest. So for me, expertise. This film, not expertise anymore, but I haven't painted a background in a few years now, but definitely my area of interest. I just think the backgrounds for this film and that they're traditional just absolutely warms my heart to know that there are like thousands of traditional backgrounds from this film surviving out there. It's my dream to get my hands on one of them someday.
Wow, yeah. I wonder where they are.
Oh, if you ever go to any of those CTN or any of those animation convention, you'll often have people that have stockpiled animation stuff, like cells and things like that, and they're often selling them. So the stuff from really popular films will obviously go for a lot. Mm-hmm.
So you're hoping everyone forgets about this film, so you can.
Yeah. Maybe I should. Maybe don't put this podcast out. Like I was talking to my boss about it yesterday. Dave McCamley, who worked. Mm-hmm. He worked at Disney at this time, so he was telling me yesterday about everyone who left Disney to go and work on this.
Wow.
And he was like, "Oh, I haven't seen it in years." I was like, oh, it's so good though. But then we were talking about because we were talking about this podcast and I was kind of asking him what he would have picked. And he said The Lion King. And I was like, are you allowed to pick something that you worked on?
Yeah, of course. You can pick whatever you want. Tom Moore picked his Friends just to talk about. Yeah. So,
So if you ever get Dave on, he can give you some great insight.
I mean, I'd love to talk about The Lion King and talk about it from the inside.
And I was asking him for any juicy gossip on this because obviously he would have known a lot of the people, and he said no.
No, he said
well,
no.
not know that he wouldn't tell me, but know that there wasn't any.
Well, you can tell me afterwards. Wink, wink. There's juicy gossip and everything. Always.
Well, it's so funny that sometimes I'll be talking to people who don't work in the industry about all the drama and all the fights and all the egos in animation, and they'll kind of go, and you make cartoons for 6-year-olds. Like it really puts you in your place.
Yeah. It's like,
every time I was getting stressed about the show I'm currently working on, it's about owls. I would be complaining so much and I'd be like, I'm about to have a breakdown, I'm so stressed. My boyfriend would go, is this about the owl show? And it would just calm me right down.
Yeah, you're just like, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. You're right. It does. The world is a way of just piling problems in on top of you. And
but then I was talking to a friend of mine he's very into diving, and he told me all about the drama around all the diving community. So I'm like, I think it's just any group of people.
Yeah.
The same problems will come up over and over again. Yeah. There's all the same drama, all the same egos, all the same everything.
All the same egos. You know, I've been doing improv classes because I really find that so interesting. It really helps for interviews because it trains you to actively listen rather than having just points prepared. You're not just, and what was your favorite? You know, none of that stuff. And I do a lot of interviews for Cartoon Brew and their affiliated animation festival in between. So I do a lot of interviews, and I've found it, the less I prepare, the more I enjoy it. Yeah. So I was like, how do I build that up? So I'm going to do improv, because it really gets you to think on the spot. But really what I've discovered improv is good at is destroying your ego. Just gets rid of it totally. You're just like, oh God, I'm making a fool of myself, you know. But then you're just like, embrace it. Who cares? You're not actually being a fool. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it totally renders the ego null. You're just kind of like, okay, this is a great experience. Challenging, but great to get past that point. I think, it's just everyone has their dreams and desires, but nobody really knows how it affects their behavior, and that can cause problems, you know, which I'm sure happened on this film. You know, you've got someone like Jeffrey Katzenberg as the leader on this, who is not exactly, from what I've heard, the easiest person in the world to work with.
And from reading about him, it seemed like he really wanted to do everything that wasn't Disney.
Yes,
he wanted just to be like an almost anti-Disney film.
I mean, how do you feel about that statement? Do you feel like it is?
I mean, I guess that it was a lot braver in terms of dealing with much heavier themes like we've been talking about, and stylization wise they tried to get away from what Disney had been doing, but ultimately it's an animated feature with music in it. With a musical. Which I love, but you know, I think that he was talking about mainly the thing he wanted to get away from was the fairy tale thing, because that's what Disney had built themselves on.
Yeah.
And this is away from that. Like, this is a completely different subject matter.
Yeah, very somber. You know, it's not I mean, there is a lovely ending of they're free.
Yeah. They didn't get into all the stuff afterwards, all the golden calf stuff and all that.
Oh God, imagine. Yeah. I mean, he was,
that's what I kept thinking at the end.
He was literally walking down from the mountain just going, you know, the sequel
imagine the film was 10 minutes longer and you're just like, oh, Jesus.
It's just like, what's happened here, lads? Or when he dies and never gets to the promised land. I guess they couldn't do that. I forgot he was so old. Who was after him is Joshua, wasn't it? He was the next leader of the Hebrews.
I'm not sure. I won't pretend to know.
I thought it might have been in Exodus, but I guess the story stops when they get out.
Or I've forgotten everybody's names again, as is my want to do.
That's fine. That's okay. They made a very good decision as to where to end this film, and you know, I think about Disney or something, and you know, really during the 90s when they had their films, there are dark films they did make, you know, Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Oh, yeah. Because Dave was talking about that yesterday because he worked on Hunchback, and I was like, who decided that would be a good Disney film? Because I love that book, the Victor Hugo book. It's really good, but it's extremely dark. Like, obviously they adapted it for an animated film. Number one, making Frollo not a priest. Which I think was a good decision, but I don't know who read it and thought, this would be a good one.
This is, you know what our audience needs next? Is a hunchback that lives in Paris. You're just like, oh, okay. And what happens in that? Well, there's a guy who hates gypsies. Okay. What else happens? Well, You know?
Well, he's going to get one and he's going to sniff her hair.
Yeah, sniff it and then sing a song about how his desires are okay. Yeah, bizarre. Or even The Lion King, like Mufasa dying is pretty brutal, you know, that it is. So there's definitely stuff in there. I feel like he was a very jaded person, Katzenberg, especially with, I think the head of Disney at the time was Michael Eisner, wasn't it? And that's why Lord Farquaad apparently looks exactly like Michael Eisner. and you know, he has his kingdom, you know, Duloc, which is basically Disneyland. You know, it really took really went for them there in Shrek, you know, and directly disassembled fairy tales. That's the anti-Disney one, really.
Have you heard actually about on Prince of Egypt? So this was the first feature they were doing, but I think like halfway through this production, they started making Shrek. And if you fucked up enough on Prince of Egypt, as punishment, you got put onto Shrek.
I did hear that as well. It was this, and he did the same thing on Pocahontas and sent them over to The Lion King.
Wow. Oh, actually, you know what? I did hear that.
Yeah, that was the P project. It's just like, okay, well, you're sending good people over? Okay, cool.
It's so funny that his instincts were off for both.
Yeah.
That the B projects on both ended up being the ones that kind of stood the test of time.
Yeah, big time. And you know, I find so interesting about it. Prince of Egypt was supposed to be the first film, but because he was so greedy, he like sprung ants, released ants just before the Prince of Egypt.
Oh, you mean Cillian Murphy and
is he in?
No. He looks like him. That's
he
lead
does
ant.
look like. Oh my god, the jaw. Yeah, I was like, this is Woody Allen. Yeah, whoa.
Yeah, I said that to my friend Lynn yesterday, and she's like, I can never unsee that.
That's so true. Jesus, you've, I don't know, heightened that. If they remake it,
if I have to see it, you all have to see it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just force it on the rest of us. Just DreamWorks obviously made incredible films around that time, you know, and The Prince of Egypt is its bastion, like truly its best film. I really, really feel that. I'm never not interested in not watching it. Exactly. If that makes sense. Yeah. I'm always interested in watching it. Yeah.
I think that their attention to detail through so they decided this was the first animated feature where they hired a dedicated costume designer.
Whoa.
Her name was Kelly Kimball, and she did an awful lot of, I did.
Yeah.
I wanted to get through my list of things that I'd actually written down. And she did all of her research and like adapted it, because obviously, you know, in animation, there's things that you don't want to do, like capes and material that's going to be too much secondary action. So it was kind of adjusted, but it was still very true to how they would have dressed. Apart from, and this is something that I've only heard and I didn't actually look it up, Ramesses, when he's a teenager with the little the
little hair,
he has the shaved head, but he has that like juvenile piece. Apparently that was only for very small children. Like it didn't really survive into your teenagehood, but I guess maybe they didn't want him to be fully bald, but they wanted him to be recognizable from when he was a kid.
Yeah, and also draw a parallel to his kid, who was the same thing.
Oh, yes, true.
That's interesting.
I find this interesting. Brenda Chapman was the first female director of an animated feature since Lottie. Oh my God, what's Lottie's?
Reininger, yeah.
Yes, thank you. In 1934.
The Adventures of Prince Ahmed came out in 1927, I thought.
Yeah. Are you Googling it or are you just remembering?
I'm pulling it out of my brain. It's in the 20s, definitely.
That's what, 70 years of no female directors in animation?
Yeah,
crazy.
It is sad, isn't it? You know, because Disney obviously had their 9 Old Men, but it always defaulted to one specific director. Yeah. And that was usually Wolfgang Reitherman. But Brenda obviously flying the flag. I know there was 2 other directors with them as well, Simon Wells and Steve Hickner, which makes sense because a film of that scale, like, how do you...
you need them. You need them all.
You need as many people as possible. Do you have any idea how many people worked on this film?
Oh, God, it's written down here somewhere. Hang on.
Yeah.
This book is so big, it's kind of difficult to...
Thanks, Aidan.
Thank you, Aidan. 380 artists technicians and managers. It took 3.5 years.
380, is that it?
Yeah.
Really? That's not a lot of people.
Yeah.
In terms of like animation teams.
I guess just the amount of time that they spent on it.
Yeah, but also 4 years is not a huge amount of time. I mean, it is maybe a year longer than some, but that's still very within the realms of a regular crew of people, maybe slightly bigger on like a film of that size.
I just think they got some absolutely, everybody was a star player.
Yeah.
Everybody on the entire production was like absolutely top of their game.
Really is, yeah. It's truly like the A team.
And I wonder if Steven Spielberg's links to live action stuff would have pulled in an awful lot of live action people who brought very new ideas to the medium.
Yes, great point. Yeah.
Paul Lezane was one of the lead background artists, and the other guy, oh my god, I didn't write down his name. Kirsten. I have it here.
Spielberg, when he does get involved with animated films, they tend to do very well, and I think part of that is because of the people he can pull in.
Oh yeah, Paul Lezane and Ron Lucas were the two lead background artists.
Yeah,
and Ron Lucas was a fine artist, easel painter, and Paul Lezane was a matte painter for live action film. And they had neither had ever worked in animation before, and they were put in charge of that department. And like I think that they would have brought an awful lot to it. Paul Lezane was kind of saying that for big epic pieces, to make it realistic but keep painterly, you have to kind of be rough. Like the more you render it, the worse it's going to look. And he was saying that he learned that through matte painting, that you have to try and get that looking realistic. And he said you need to let the brain fill in the gaps. If you over render everything, it's going to look worse, which I thought was very interesting.
Which is a great point as well, because, you know, I know for a fact on Bambi, they really struggled with trying to capture a realistic forest, and eventually they settled on Chinese style background paintings because totally artistically driven, but they capture the essence of what a forest should look like, you know, without over rendered detail that would totally take away from the deer. If you took a video camera out to a forest and we're trying to film something and there's bushes in the way, you're not going to see anything, you know, realistically. And I know a lot of that is framing, and obviously the biggest benefit of animation is control of everything. It's also the biggest drawback. Who was it that said it? You know, the best thing about animation is you can do anything, and the best thing, the worst thing about animation is you can do anything.
I definitely agree with that. One thing actually in regards to framing and style that I really noticed is in the first half of the film, when we're in Egypt, there's an awful lot of like directly horizontal shots that look like hieroglyphic. We see everybody from the side. And that stops when he learns about his roots and he changes. It's suddenly all much more organic and realistic kind of shots, like something that we would be more used to seeing. Wow,
that's so good. I never caught that ever. That's a great catch.
I don't know if it's true or if I'm just making it up.
It definitely has the I think you might be right there, because it does feel slightly altered. Everything feels altered except the shots of when he's talking to him in the throne room, and you know, you have that flat horizontal view of the two massive statues there, like him and his father, bearing the shadow down over him. You know, and just like there's the link in the chain. Basically, he feels this pressure to keep the dynasty going because his dad was a bit of a bastard, you know.
And I think it is like really good the way that they have retained the humanity in who is essentially the antagonist. So not just Ramesses, but the entire Egyptian population. You know, there's that bit where Moses is walking through in the plague song where he's seeing the Egyptians are scared and are kind of defending each other and huddling together, and the plague,
especially that one kid.
I know exactly the shot you're talking about. And like the plague of the firstborns, like that's a horrible scene, even though it's quote unquote punishing the bad guys, if you know what I mean. The wail that goes up afterwards is horrible. Moses and like Ramesses' son and all of that. The humanization of everybody in that film, I think, is its real strength. Reading the source material, a lot of that is taken away.
Yes, yeah, that's just Bible. You know? It's just the Bible. Nobody really has it's not written to be a character study. Unfortunately, you know.
But the decision to put that in, I think, was a really strong one, because it becomes a very morally complex film then.
Incredibly complex, yeah. Really, like, I mean, you can understand both people's point of view, and they constantly say to each other, it's like, you know, you're so stubborn. And he just sees Moses as this guy who used to get him in trouble all the time.
Yeah.
You know, that's all, but a brother that he loved. And then he's come back with this, you know, defiant message.
And also just his worldview. I mean, like in the first half of the film, again, we don't see the slaves nearly at all.
Yeah, true.
Until Moses learns about his own heritage, and then our view switches to them.
Yeah.
But Ramesses would have remained willingly oblivious to all of that. And like his worldview is completely different. Like I watched a video essay the other day about somebody was like in his defense where it was kind of like, you know, his brother killed somebody, he excused him for it, he disappeared into the desert for like 10 years, he comes back and says, now you have to do this, and he's like, what?
I mean, it is shocking to do that. And you know, that's what I love again about the plague song, is Moses singing away, you know, about how distraught he is, how he wished it wasn't him in that position. And then Ramesses is singing about, I called you brother, how could you do this to me? And you know, you feel the betrayal and the hurt and everything pouring out of him, whereas at the same time, who is truly the stubborn one there? Is it Ramesses or is it Moses? He's been so stubborn in like how he's approaching this thing. He's just like, they're both so stubborn. But ultimately, there is a right and there is a wrong here. And it's so interesting how they, you know, they say that the key to a true story is, what do both these characters want and why can't they have it? And it's even more interesting if they want the same thing. So someone's going to lose out here.
I think, you know, even though it's quite a heavy film emotionally and everything, I think that the humor in it is also perfect. You know, the little bits of like, the camel eating his hair like it's grass.
Yeah. There's also that camel, maybe it's not the same camel, but they get a lot out of camels.
Leaning his head on Aaron's shoulder at the end when he's like, oh yeah, me too.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking of. I was like, well, what is going on with this camel here?
And the Hotep and Hoy characters, like the kind of con man kind of spiel, and they get a musical number and everything. Like, I think it is the lightness in it does bring it back. And it's kind of perfect the way that it all turns out.
And you're right about that idea of it like humanizes everyone. You know, these aren't these spiritual priests. They're clearly con men, you know, who've taken advantage of their abilities to have this position, who hate Moses. You know, sorry, we don't want to say this, but, you know, it grieves us to say this, but, you know, the punishment is death. It's like, it didn't sound like that grieved you.
And also, like, just all the voice actors and like, this is where Steven Spielberg really called in all his mates and was like, we are having not just one absolute star, like everyone is a star. Everyone is like
a star.
Everyone is the most famous person you've ever heard.
When you relegate Sandra Bullock to being, you know, a minor side character in the movie, you're just like, what's happening here?
So apparently Patrick Stewart really struggled with acting on I think it wasn't his first animated film, but he doesn't like doing animated films because he doesn't like not having anyone to play off.
Okay.
He doesn't like not having other actors there.
He's a theater actor.
But Helen Mirren loved it because she was like, I can do as many takes as I want and it doesn't bother anybody.
And you know, again, she didn't have a massive role.
No, she was only there for a bit.
I'd say she had less than 20 lines in the whole film. Really. And what a powerful actress to just give 20 lines to. You know, it just,
and
you're totally right.
Jeff Goldblum, they clearly like took some of his acting in the booth and kind of used it for Aaron. I definitely see him in that character.
Yeah. You can. It's kind of like a genie. You know, they totally just pull the mannerisms in. Yeah, and he's and Ralph Fiennes again. You know, incredible casting choice.
Yeah. Did you notice all the Egyptians are English and all of the Hebrews are American?
American. Yeah, I did notice that. I was like, classic Hollywood, up to it again, huh? But I thought about it further, and I was like, it makes sense because, you know, we associate British with royalty, and these are the royalty of the story.
Yeah.
This is how I was justifying it to myself, you know.
It's a further separation of the two communities.
You said it better than what I was about to say.
I'm sorry. What were you going to say? Maybe
I don't know. It was going to be a ramble to get to that point. That's all I know. Oh, brilliant. I do know that for the Red Sea sequence, I'm going to throw out a statistic here, a number, which you probably already heard, but it took about 300,000 hours of rendering time.
Whoa,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah, which is the equivalent of something like 36 years.
When I was reading about it, I was like, oh my God, I can't imagine doing this on those big computers with the big square monitors. Can you imagine?
Yeah, you hear it clunking away. Yeah, incredible what they were able to do. Really, it is top tier. You know, I know people who have no interest in animation love this film.
Yeah.
Really, truly love it. It's like a gateway drug to, you know, but it's not all downhill, but it's, you know, this is one of the best guys. So choose wisely after this.
Actually, that's one thing that when I was trying to watch it again, I found it very difficult to find. I know I was mentioning this to you the other day, but I was surprised that it wasn't just on Netflix or something indefinitely, because it's kind of one of those films that you would just expect to be very easy to watch. I had to rent it. I had to pay for it on YouTube. But I did. I'll do it for this film, but I was a little outraged.
Yeah. You're just like, for God's sake. I was saying to you, I found it on Now TV over here, which is sad because I have the Blu-ray and I didn't just watch the Blu-ray. I wanted the freedom of watching it on my laptop if I needed to, you know, with my headphones on, which is a ridiculous thing to say because it deserves a giant screen and a beautiful sound system.
It would have greatly upset you to learn that I watched it on my phone.
No, you've watched it so many times.
I had to, because I tried to like cast it onto my TV and it was like, you can't do this with paid for content. And I was like, what is the point of paying for it then? What?
Yeah, pay for less access, basically. You can't do that with that motherfucker. That's such bullshit, really, isn't it? Like,
I know.
Awful,
an outrage.
Awful, outrageous. Well, on that outrageous point, I've kept you way longer than I meant to. But
no, that's fine. I had lots to say, so it's all good.
Yeah, but thank you so much. I love talking about the Prince of Egypt, and you know, I learned so much in this. I hope everyone else did as well. I actually did, which is the true joy of doing these things. You know, it's like, it's so good to get to know you through what you love.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're so welcome.
Thank you to Aidan for the book again. It was a lot of the information from this podcast came from that book.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, I love The Prince of Egypt. I watch it so much. So where'd you get your information? Oh, yesterday out of this book. Oh, okay. But it's like, it puts I was going to say the foundation behind your love, but really the foundation was already there. I don't know what metaphor I'm going to use. But thank you so much. I'll let you go.
Cool. Thank you so much.
I'll play you some lovely music here on the way out.
Thank you.
Some Prince of Egypt music. Very slow. Not exactly the best music to end on, really, is it? It's the opening song of the film.
What's the closing song of the film?
Animator's Breakfast is part of the Any-mation network, which is hosted and edited by Cole Delaney. This podcast is funded through patreon.com. And if you're looking for exclusive content or just even connecting to us and joining our community, you can join us there on Patreon. There's a link in the description. In joining that, you support a wide range of our endeavors, including interviews with industry professionals right here on Animator's Breakfast, as well as our upcoming brother podcast, Animator's Odyssey, which is a journey through the history of animation. And don't forget, you'll also support critical thinking and a personal journey through animation for myself on my YouTube channel, Any-mation. Thank you so much for listening. Catch you next time.